Okay, welcome to The Otherppl Show, a weekly podcast featuring in-depth conversations with today's leading writers. I'm Brad Listi. This is my podcast. Welcome to it. Hope you're okay wherever you happen to be. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and you can follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky. My guest today is Elaine Hsieh Chou, author of the debut story collection, Where Are You Really From? It's available from Penguin Press, and it is the official September pick of the Otherppl Book Club. That is my book club. If you want to sign up for my book club, you can do that at otherppl.com, the show's official website. Get a new book delivered to your door every 30 days. I interview book club authors on this program. So, Where Are You Really From is a superb story collection. Elaine Hsieh Chou is working with themes of obsession and desire and identity and perception, human relationships, human stories. It is a surreal collection at times. There's some sci-fi elements to it. It's subversive. It can be funny. It can be unnerving, scary even. It's a remarkable collection, and I had a great conversation with Elaine Hsieh Chou. That is coming up in just a bit. So a quick reminder about my weekly email newsletter. You can subscribe for free over at bradlisti.substack.com, and you'll hear from me once a week in your inbox. I'll reach out to you. I will share news of the latest episodes of this program. I also share a list of links to things that I've been reading and finding interesting. So if you want to hear from me once a week in your inbox, go sign up at bradlisti.substack.com. I also want to plug Deep Dive, my new company. It specializes in the creation of in-depth audio courses. The debut course from Deep Dive is called How to Write a Novel. It features more than 50 hours of never-before-heard insight, inspiration, and instruction from nearly 46 of today's most celebrated contemporary authors, including Emily St. John Mandel, Stephen Graham Jones, Melissa Broder, Steve Almond, and dozens more. It's an MFA-level education at a tiny fraction of the price, and you can listen to it online or, better yet, via the Deep Dive app. So you can take it with you wherever you go. You can listen in the car or while you're walking the dog or while you're cooking dinner, whatever works. It's intended to be user-friendly and convenient. And it's a big course, more than 50 hours. And it can be yours right now at www.deepdive.audio. I am the host of the course, I should add. It unfolds as a series of conversations, and it's good to listen to, or at least I hope it is. So check it out. You can listen to a sample episode at deepdive.audio. All right, so my guest today is Elaine Hsieh Chou. Her debut story collection is called Where Are You Really From? It is available from Penguin Press. And once again, it is the official September pick of the Otherppl Book Club. Elaine Hsieh Chou is a Taiwanese American author and screenwriter. She's originally from California, and her debut novel, Disorientation, was a New York Times editor's choice and a finalist for the New York Public Library Young Lions Fiction Award and the Thurber Prize. Where Are You Really From is her debut collection, and it's just superb. I am so happy to welcome Elaine Hsieh Chou onto this program for the first time and to get to spotlight this book in the Otherppl Book Club. So let's get to the conversation. Here I am with Elaine Hsieh Chou, and the new book, one more time, is called Where Are You Really From?
There was a story that was in the collection for quite a long time before I decided it wasn't ready or just didn't fit the collection in the end. It's called A Model Minority. It's about the first Asian American man who joins the KKK. And I've always been fascinated by the sort of hardcore Republicans and conservatives that are Asian. I just find them very fascinating. And there are many. And I think they've grown. And so this story was sort of me trying to understand that type of character, because I have a lot of disdain for that type of character. And I think I'm always trying to write towards understanding people that I don't understand. And he thinks he's joining his company's softball team. And he's hanging around with these people, and they're sort of interrogating him to figure out if he's a good fit for the team. And this woman that he's interested, she asks him where he's from. He says Wyoming, and he had a very sort of traumatic childhood growing up in Wyoming. But she's not happy with that answer and says, but where are you really from? So that's where the title came from originally. And after I cut the story, I did actually consider changing it, but nothing else stuck. I guess nothing really affected me the way that title did. And I think a lot of the stories share in common this feeling of, how do I perceive myself versus how do other people perceive me? Not just on a sort of physical level, right? On the level of race or gender, but just as a human in the world. And so I liked that. And I liked the question mark, which originally existed when this was my MFA senior thesis for when I was at NYU. I had a question mark then, but I think removing it made it seem more like a statement about you that this, questioner is making, which I think is what's happening when I've gotten that question before. People have already made a decision about you, and now they're almost waiting for you to butt up against it or to reassure them that their assumptions are correct.
Well, there's something aggressive about that question.
Oh, yes.
It's like a microaggression, but it's an aggression. And, it's got to get old.
It does get old. I lived in France for 7 years, and at one point I thought I would live there forever. And French people are very obsessed with what they call les origines. That's how they term, I don't know, your background. And so I got that question all the time. Or sometimes people would just say like, oh, you're Chinese, right? And they would just start talking about China all of a sudden. And some people thought when I said Taiwan, they thought I meant Thailand. So they would start talking about Thailand. I once had a bus driver. I was just sitting there waiting for the bus to move. And this bus driver started shouting out different Asian countries. Just, Japan, Cambodia. And I was just sitting there like, wait, is he talking to me? What's happening? And then I looked up and I saw him staring at me through that mirror, waiting for me to, I guess, finally respond to one of these Asian countries.
Like it's a game show or something.
Uh-huh. Like he would win a prize if he guessed right.
And yeah, and like, how do you respond? Again, it's like, how do you respond to that? You're sort of frozen. Have you ever lost your temper with that question?
Sometimes it's escalated, yeah. And I think, or maybe it didn't start that. One time I was called a Chinese tour guide when I was with, I think we were all American, but I was the Chinese tour guide, right? And we started yelling at each other, and everyone's always shocked that I can speak French, and it's, diminished quite a lot since I moved back. But I started cursing at him in French, which I had gotten quite good at. And the look on his face, I mean, he turned white, and I knew a lot of the bad sayings by then. And I think he was so shocked, he just said, and I was calling him, you're racist. Because he told my Black friends that they were from Detroit. He just like announced that, and they were not. And so anyways, I said, you say t'es un gros raciste. And he was like, what? You're the racist. He got so upset at the end. He was just shouting at me that I was racist. I was like, how did we get here?
Can I ask you a question? Like, why Detroit? Like, that seems random.
Yeah, he just, this man, he was a white Frenchman. He just marched up to us and started pointing at each of us. So he was like, you're from Detroit. You're from, I don't even know how he got these ideas. Probably American movies, dubbed poorly or something in French. And then I was at the end of the line, and then he got to me and said, and you're their Chinese tour guide. Yeah, no one ever believed that I was American. French people don't know what an Asian American is. They've never heard of that before.
Fascinating. And this is not a line that gets uttered in the collection as it exists, but it is a line that speaks thematically to this idea of how we perceive ourselves versus how others perceive us, as you were saying, not just in terms of gender or race, but also in terms of just, I don't know, how we take up space in the world, what our motivations might be, assumptions people make about our interior. And this is it's a very common human experience. As you were saying that a bit ago, I was thinking about walking my dog this morning. I was finishing your collection as I was doing that. I was hiking here in Los Angeles, and I'm on the trail, and I'm coming up behind an older woman. And I've sort of learned you got to kind of like take a wide angle. You don't want to pass somebody too close. But and I don't want to startle anybody. You know what I'm saying? So I tried to take a wide angle, but this woman startled. And then I got this narrative going in my head. I was like, what does she think I'm doing? I'm wearing a big straw hat. I've got a dog that's cute, but she, who knows? Maybe she doesn't like dogs. I don't know. But
there's a whole series of like Instagram videos where I haven't seen it in a while, but it's white men hiking, and then they see a woman, and then how do I put this? They put on, I guess, a sort of stereotypical, what we associate with like a gay persona or voice. And then the woman is suddenly fine. Like she'll be really tense, and then you'll be, say like, I don't know, I love your nails or something, like a signal. And then she suddenly relaxes. So I've seen enough of them that it's like, I think this is a real thing, that just speaking to, fears that women have, that they are legitimate, but they're not necessarily logical or fair, but I think they are, exist for a reason.
So what you're telling me is that I need to act gay next time I see a woman tense up as I'm approaching. See, I have this whole theory. This is I do it because I'm very fair skinned, and I have all this I have all these skin cancer fears or whatever. My dermatologist is very adamant that I protect myself. And so I wear this straw hat, and I feel like that has been fairly effective at like reducing whatever threat level I might project, because I just think people see a guy in a big straw hat and it's like, okay, this guy, there's no way somebody wears that hat.
That's not an assaulter's hat. No. Their typical go-to fashion. Yeah, probably baseball cap, dark hoodie.
Yes, exactly.
So you're avoiding all that. Yeah.
But I guess I was coming up from behind, so she couldn't see the hat until it was like, I was already there. So I guess from now on, if that happens, I'll have to suddenly get into my gay performance.
No, I'm not anyone listening to this, I'm not suggesting we do that.
But it does make sense. So it's just interesting, and your book speaks really eloquently, just in, broadly speaking, to the tensions and disequilibriums between internal and external human experience, perception and misperception, ideas that we have of ourselves versus maybe the reality of who we actually are, versus the way that the ways in which other people perceive us and think about us. There's a lot of gray area. And I think that in doing some prep, it was interesting to me to learn that this story collection happened somewhat by accident. I guess I'll let you talk about it, but you were, I think, working on your novel, your debut novel, Disorientation, and maybe that was your thesis? Was that your thesis in grad school?
No, it ended up being not this collection as it exists now, but it was all the short stories I had written when I was at NYU.
Oh, so, that's right. Because you didn't want to share the novel because you needed it to be like a private creative exercise.
Exactly. I tried once, the very first workshop, and I would not say it was horrific. I did get confusing feedback, but I realized at that moment, like, oh, I've never workshopped anything that wasn't completed before, right? Because I had never written a novel before, and I've never workshopped anything that was not completed. So I realized in that moment, oh, this doesn't work for me. I can't be hearing these, outside voices while I'm still in that gestation period where I'm figuring out the story and I'm figuring out the voice and what I'm trying to achieve. All of it was really amorphous at that point. So after that one workshop, I thought, okay, never again. But now what? Because I have 2 years and you workshop typically 2, sometimes 3 pieces per semester. So that's a lot of writing you have to turn in at a, pretty fast clip. So I thought, well, I'll write short stories because that's what I'm familiar with them. That's what I wrote in undergrad, and I loved short stories so much. So I was really happy to do that in a way because Disorientation is such a specific world and setting in academia, and the voice is so specific too. Like, it is a satire, and it was this voice I'd never written in before. And I think writing the short stories gave me the freedom to experiment, and I was writing in all different voices and tenses, and I was just trying to write stories, I think, that like the only unifying goal I had for myself was I want to write Asian and Asian American characters that I just haven't seen before, that, aren't immigrants that are suffering necessarily. They're sort of like quietly suffering. I wanted to see them be disgusting and cruel and bad and weird and to be the kind of characters that I love reading about, but I just hadn't seen us in those roles, So that was the only sort of unifying goal. And then I think by the end of the first year, or maybe start of the second year, that's when I realized, oh, I think I'm putting together a story collection. Let me think about this more intentionally now. But even then, I think I was just still pushing myself with that goal. And I was really influenced by what was happening around me, or sort of experiences I had gone through, and just working out certain, I guess, obsessions and fears on the page, and that's how it started.
Yeah, a couple things. It's that you kind of backed into it. I said you wrote it by accident. It's kind of half true. You intended to write stories. You had to fulfill this quota, and get some material submitted to your workshop. But you were kind of doing it on the side, and it became this playground for you to experiment. And there was maybe a freedom and a lack of preciousness to it for those reasons. And then there was also an imposed deadline. So I think those two things, I've heard that, so many times over the years talking to writers. We'll be talking about a particular book, and it'll be the book that they were kind of working on the side. It was the book they were writing to avoid writing the other one that they thought was going to be the book.
Right. That's what they call cheating on your main project with a side project. And that there's a sort of delight in it. And maybe a freedom because you don't have that pressure, right? You're like, this is just for me. This is just for fun. And in that mental freedom, I think the best work can emerge.
It's also notable that, like as you said, Disorientation, your debut novel, is a satire. And so you kind of got stuck with that label when the book came out to a lot of acclaim. And this story collection, I suppose, might have some satirical elements to it, but that's not the word that would come to mind for me if I were trying to define this collection for others. So it diverges. You have to be cognizant of that.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I think in earlier versions of the collection, like when it was the MFA thesis, there were more satirical stories. So, for example, that one about the first Asian American man to join the KKK, that is a sort of hard satire. And I think maybe, and there was another one about an Asian sorority, sort of inspired by like all the Asian sororities that were around when I went to college. And in the end, I think those stories didn't make the cut because the ones that persisted through all the revisions, I think were the ones that just had more of a psychological weight, and they became more intimate and dark. And I was letting myself and trying to actually intentionally go places that scared me. Because otherwise, why write if you're going to write safe?
Okay, so
right?
let me stop you then. What are some of the places that scared you?
I think happy endings was scary to write about violence and sex in that way. And it's the one story that, yeah, I wish I didn't know how to talk about it with my dad, but I think because he's reading it, as we speak. But I think that's the one that I sort of wish, like, I should have just given him like a warning, like, you know what, just don't read this one. Featured background was hard too because of the estrangement. That's just something that's in my life, parental estrangement. So that was very hard. Writing from a lot of, I think, different perspectives that aren't my own are hard too. Like David's point of view in the novella, that's a point of view that I had like butted up against, was sort of, I don't know if you've heard of what they call MR Asians, like men's rights activists, but they're Asian men, and their sort of MO is any Asian woman who dates or like looks at a white man, as a white worshiping whore. We should all be burned at the stake or something. So that was something that, yeah, I wanted to challenge myself to write it from his point of view, because I think it's way too easy to write it from, let's say, like Sophia's point of view, because I felt like that would be much more comfortable for me, right? Or like in featured background, I initially was like, oh, is this story Athena's story? But again, that was way too easy and uninteresting to me because it felt easy. So I wanted to purposely write it from those POVs that were more difficult.
That's interesting. And you said earlier you like to write towards fear and discomfort, and maybe in an attempt to try to get to deeper understanding. And I'm wondering if in your experiences as a writer, where you're writing into maybe these uncomfortable psyches, male characters who are problematic in some way or whatever it is, like, have you come to any conclusions or deeper understandings that you can kind of take away? Has it helped you resolve questions that you have?
I don't think it resolves anything, but I do think it expands you inside. And I feel sort of, corny saying this, but I think every story you write, it makes you grow a little. Like, it's like, for example, let's say you started out with like 100 rooms in yourself. And I know this is sort of like a metaphor in the dollhouse, but I think with every story you write, it's like this new room that suddenly is there inside you. And you've now technically have lived through this experience that maybe you haven't lived through before. And so I have all these stories that have never been published that I don't think are going to be published. But they're still in me. I still sometimes go into that room and I'm like, oh, what's going on in here? Or just the terror of that room sometimes. Like I wrote one story that maybe I'll revisit one day, but it is about a woman who abuses a child, like a young boy, for quite a few years while she was working for him. And that was really scary to write, I think, to let myself go there. And that sort, it's funny how the things you write can haunt yourself, you know? So I think that's a room that's just still there and feels really real to me. And it's sometimes odd that I'm like, oh, it's not real outside of me. It's only in my computer and maybe in a few submittable rejection boxes, you know?
Well, how many stories didn't make the cut? I'm wondering how many wound up on the cutting room floor.
So officially 5, what we can call, standard length stories and all the flash fiction. So originally I think, put every flash fiction piece I'd ever written in the MFA thesis. And I cut all of those because it was like a different type of collection towards the end, especially with the novella. These are all long stories, and I tend to write long stories anyway. But yeah, 5 full-length stories, and I think, I'm not even sure how many flash fiction pieces there were, like at least 5, maybe more.
And there's something that this collection does that really impressed me. It always impresses me when I see this done well in fiction, because I think it's something that I have a hard time imagining myself doing or being able to do, and that is to intermingle the real with the surreal. And to get into like supernatural stuff. And I'm thinking of the doppelganger story. I believe it's called You Put a Rabbit on Me. Mm-hmm. And this one takes place in Paris. And it was fun to be in Paris. And now that I know that I think you lived in Paris, right?
I lived in 3 cities, but Paris was one of them for 3 years. Yeah.
What were the other 2?
I was in the Northeast in a city called Metz, sort of medium-sized. It used to be German for a while, so it's got that influence. And then my very first year in France, I was sent to this tiny seaside town called Les Sables d'Olonne, on the West Coast. Yeah, very small. I think in the off season, 1,000 inhabitants. That's how small it was. Okay.
So that's a story. It's a doppelganger story that kind of takes all these twists. And it's kind of sci-fi. There's like a sci-fi aspect to it. And I totally bought into it.
Good.
Like, that's the trick. Yeah, right? Better than the alternative. But I just want to hear you talk about making those creative choices and then having maybe the courage of your convictions to follow through with them. And then how, from a craft perspective, you work your way towards this kind of solidity. There's like a consistency within the world of the story that you achieve that makes it believable and brings the reader along. How do you do that?
Oh, wow. That's a great compliment. I think I sort of hope it works out. I'm not even sure if it is working out, and then it's a great relief to hear when it has. But I think when and this was back in undergrad.
Where did you go to undergrad?
UC Irvine.
Okay.
Where I believe Amy Bender, I think she was an MFA student, but that was the first time I read her work. And Amy, I think, really was at the forefront of, and I would say George Saunders and Kelly Link are 2 others that, I just think they're incredible at writing very human, very grounded stories, but with this fantastical bent. But yeah, Amy Bender, I think she was writing, it was something, I don't know if it's magical realism that sort of, I think, tends to be used for, I'm not sure how to differentiate them, but her stories were really out there, but they were so, at the end of the day, they were always about being human, right? Her story, The End of the Line, which is about a big man who buys a tiny man at sort of a pet store. It is one of the most powerful stories I've read about what it means to be cruel to others and to be kind to others. And it's so short. It's remarkable what you can accomplish. So I really looked up to writers like her. George Saunders, Kelly Link, Judy Budnitz is another writer I adore. Her collection, Nice Big American Baby, beautiful name. Yeah, it should have a lot more renown than it does. But because I looked up to them so much, I just wanted to achieve what they were achieving. And I think with a lot of times you don't know what you're doing, you're just writing towards what you love, right? And hoping that it can pass muster. And so that's all I did really. I think it was having these models before me that showed me how, this is possible. I think because without them, maybe I wouldn't have known, is it possible? And I think during the MFA, I gave myself a lot of freedom to try and fail at these different ideas. And sometimes I definitely would fail, So there are a lot of these stories that just will never see the light of day. But I think they're always bringing you closer to that moment where, something does click. And I'm so grateful that one reads as believable, I guess we can say, because that's the part about believability is always emotional. It's not logical. And I think in a lot of workshops that criticism, this isn't believable, which can feel very affronting to writers. Like I've been in workshops where the writer will speak up and say, well, this happened. And so then everyone's just sort of like, well, how do we proceed with, why isn't it clicking then if it happened? So I think it's about emotional logic, psychological logic, and giving the reader a lot more credit than maybe we think we can give them. Like readers and audiences are really smart and very perceptive. And so if you impose on your character, they are going to behave in an inorganic way. And it might satisfy like the writer's need to make a certain ending happen, right? Or like, this is my theme, so I must hit these beats. But the reader can see past that. And the reader can say, you've now forced this character that you've made real to act unreal. And it's so intuitive. So I think that's why you see in a lot of reviews, like, when this character did this, I totally didn't buy it. And because it's just very intuitive when something's being imposed on them.
Well, I mean, the word intuitive was occurring to me as you were talking, because I think so much of feeling your way towards a finished story that has this kind of narrative integrity and this believability, like you just got to kind of feel your way there. That's like the unsatisfying answer to so many questions about the writing of fiction. But I loved what you said about emotional logic taking precedence over the actual like logic of reality, or whatever you want to, however you phrased it. I think that's a great lesson, that if you're working in the direction of surrealism, keeping emotional logic and the emotions and like desires of characters at the fore is a wise way to go.
Oh yeah. I had this professor in undergrad who he was a Joycean. So he only taught Joyce and studied Joyce. And he was the first professor I ever had who talked about all the characters as if they were real people. And, in English class, especially as an undergrad, you gain points by like making these really outlandish claims, right? Like such and such character is secretly closeted or wants to like murder his mom and use really obscure quotes to back it up, right? But James, that's his name, James McMichael, he would not stand for that. And he would just look you dead in the face and say, well, no, that's not possible, because this character lived here at this time, their job was this. Like, it was just these are real people, and you can't sort of twist them into a shape for your little essay thesis, right? And I think that really moved me. And I think stayed with me, the beauty in treating literature and not for our means, like the writer's means, right? But for actually the people you're writing about, for how do you sort of respect them as real people? What changes when you have no choice but to see them as real?
I think that obsession and desire are two other themes that come through in these stories. I'm imagining you're aware of this.
Yes.
I would hope. But It really speaks to the ways in which people can obsess about other people in particular. I mean, you can obsess with lots of different things, but in this collection, what comes to mind first for me is the ways in which the characters can become obsessed with one another. If we're going to stay in France with You Put a Rabbit on Me, the story called You Put a Rabbit on Me, you have these doppelganger characters, and one is named Elaine A, and one is named Elaine B. And Elaine A is kind of obsessed with Elaine B. And I guess to maybe a bit of a lesser extent, Elaine B is obsessed with Elaine A. Feels like most of the obsession is in Elaine A, right? Am I remembering correctly?
I think because we never really access Elaine B's point of view, we don't know how much of the obsession is returned. But I think towards the end, her behavior is so erratic when Elaine A begins to pull away that I think she starts to feel very obsessed with her, or at least maybe just having control over Elaine B. Elaine A. Sorry.
So can I psychoanalyze this story for a moment? I was thinking about this. Listen, you named
Please
the character.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you named the characters Elaine A and Elaine B. So I was sort of like, okay, she probably worked as an au pair in France. This feels lived in. I could be wrong. Maybe you didn't, but at least
I taught ESL.
Okay.
So,
close enough. You were in France, and you were kind of young and impressionable, and like maybe thinking about the path before you and what you wanted your life to look like, and maybe who you wanted to be. It's like, this is a story that's very much about identity. And I like this idea of different versions of oneself sort of playing out. This was a way for you to examine maybe ways in which you were imagining your future, or maybe with the benefit of hindsight, ways in which you were thinking about roads you could have taken. Am I barking up the right tree or no?
I think so. I think a lot of that is subconscious. I think in hindsight, the compulsion to write this kind of story, I think, originates from maybe at this point, like a lifelong obsession with identity, and not on a surface level, but truly, who am I? What does it mean to be a human?
Yeah.
But certainly when I went to France, I had graduated undergrad a year before. So first I taught ESL in Taiwan for 1 year. And that experience was really formative and necessary for me. But when I went to France, I was still very naive. I still had all these fanciful ideas about what France would be like, which I thought would be exactly like the movie Amélie. The fact that it was a movie, I don't know, didn't deter my mind from just imagining. And I also thought France would still be like in the 60s, like in the new wave films, So imagine my surprise when France was nothing like that. And I thought it would just be very quaint in a way and sort of very French, but so much of France is actually American. I've written about it in another story, but yeah, it was very disorienting to come and see, like on TV, they were playing like Monk all the time, Ally McBeal. Was it Xena the Warrior Princess? Like these shows that hadn't been on air in America in a long time. And I was like, am I in some Twilight Zone? Why is everyone still watching this? And then, I learned, the rights are cheap now. And so France can afford to buy those shows and dub them. Everything is dubbed. And every American actor has a counterpart in France. So every time, let's say, Jennifer Aniston has a role, her French counterpart is like, yay, I get another paycheck. I get a voice her. So that, again, all these weird moments like that, and moments where I just realized, well, I can't be Amélie because Amélie's a white French woman and I'm not. And my experience throughout the entire 7 years, I think, was becoming disillusioned with this fantasy I had built up of France and maybe who I thought I could be once I lived in this place that I had idealized, right? But the ironic thing, I think it was so necessary for me to go through the sort of difficulties I did go through because, more or less I had been in this bubble in California and I hadn't had to bump up against like outright harassment, and sometimes in very frightening ways, because there is this stereotype around Asian women in France, which is that we're all sex workers. And I was followed multiple times and like tailed at night by cars, like just, yeah. And that time I was like screaming for my life. Like that night, I thought I was gonna, like something horrific was gonna happen, because I'd only been in France for a few weeks. I think I knew like one French person, my French roommate, and she was out of town. Anyways, not to go on a whole tangent, but all this to say, I had to learn so much about myself during those 7 years. I had to confront my beliefs in politics in a way that I just hadn't before. Like France radicalized me. And I say that in a good way, because I think I had just been sort of coasting along as, like a complacent Democrat. Like, yeah, I vote Democrat every 4 years faithfully, but I hadn't gone beyond that, and living in France is when I started organizing and participating in activism for the first time in my life. So not at all what I thought would happen, right, when I moved there, which was I thought my life would be this fairy tale movie.
So, okay, but you say it radicalized you. You started participating. Was it just the participation that radicalized you, or were there ways in which maybe French politics and the situation on the ground in France like shifted your views?
Yeah, I think it was having to confront systemic racism, because as all this was happening, Ferguson was happening in the U.S. So I was part of, me and my friends, we helped organize the first massive protest in Paris around that same time. It was right after Eric Garner was murdered. So it was, for him and Mike Brown, but we were then like put in contact with these French activists who were like, we want to help with this protest, because what's happening in Ferguson has been happening in France forever. And suddenly I was having these conversations with French people that were just, blowing my mind, again, further sort of destroying the fantasy I had built up. But that, yeah, it shouldn't be surprising either that this is a country that has colonized so many other countries, and that colonization was never reckoned with. So I was learning about France's very difficult past that I think is ongoing. Those wounds I think have never been healed over. And the stories I heard from people of color who are French, who grew up in France, I mean, they were horrific, really horrific. And then the things I was experiencing, in the streets, or even when I was teaching, like the pushback I would get, because someone like me was not supposed to teach English. Like, it just didn't like make sense to a lot of kids. I think all of that together just made me, for the first time, look into these issues in a way I just hadn't before, and to question my complicity, right? Like, how had I turned a blind eye? How had I participated in sort of dangerous rhetoric without knowing it, right? Yeah, everything changed. I think it was 2014 when, Ferguson happened. Like, I felt like I was asleep, and it felt like waking up.
I felt that too, maybe more recently. Like, it's taken me longer.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I've been politically engaged since I was about 18. I used to think of myself as like well-informed. I was certainly like a high information consumer of political news. And so I could maybe talk about it fluently to a degree that exceeded most people. But the place that I'm in now, in light of all that's happened, is one of much greater humility. I mean, I think I know my core values, but my understanding of geopolitics, I have to cop to having a very limited understanding. My understanding of this country and like its internal machinations and what animates it and where people are spiritually and politically. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just like, I don't know. There's a lot that I don't know. That's basically where I'm at. And I kind of inclined to start there in a lot of different situations, and to maybe keep my mouth shut more often than I previously would have, and observe and think and read and just make sure before I make any grand proclamations that I know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, I think, sort of a very difficult step to take, is that humility of I don't know, I'm here to learn, right? And I myself was in these spaces where I was like, I'm here to listen and learn. Asian American activists have been around since forever, and our history has really been erased. But we've also been very complicit in anti-Black rhetoric and I would say policy, right? Like so much of the anti-affirmative action just movement in America is by Asian Americans, largely East Asian Americans. So that's all these things. Like, and when Peter Liang was killed, when Peter Liang killed Akai Gurley, that was like this other shocking moment where I think a lot of Asians like had never seen themselves in that role as the perpetrator of police violence, right?
When was this? I'm sorry.
I think 2016. Yeah.
Can you just describe, like, just briefly, because I think there might be people, myself included, who don't remember this story.
Yeah. So Peter Liang was, I think, an NYPD cop who, I'm not sure what he was responding to, but Akai Gurley was a Black man who I think was in a stairwell, and the stairwell was dark or something, but Akai hadn't done anything. I don't know if he was hiding out. I also should check the details of that, but Peter just started shooting indiscriminately and killed him. And I think what happened afterwards was very eye-opening in that a lot of, not all, definitely not all, but quite a few Asian Americans were protesting for justice for Peter, for saying, well, these other white cops who killed Black men face no repercussions. So why is Peter facing repercussions? And so there was like a lot of tension between the Black and Asian communities to say, why don't you want justice for Akai? Justice has been served in this one rare instance where Peter, I'm not sure if he was outright fired, but, he faced repercussions. But yeah, it was sort of surreal to see people holding up signs, justice for Peter Liang, and then like across the street, you'd see like justice for Akai Gurley. So I think I remember having arguments with people on Facebook, at that time, who I think maybe I didn't have a lot of space in my heart back then to hear why they were hurt. I was just like, you're anti-Black, you need to go do work on yourself, block this person, moderate. But then it's like the scary side of that is this person, if they're shunned from Asian spaces, can then go online and find, I don't know, like white national spaces that would happily welcome someone who's feeling angered and resentful, right, from being cast out of by his community. So in retrospect, I'm like, I don't think my responses back then were the right responses.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah. But that moment, I think it shook up a lot of us, and we really had to confront how much do we understand the history of Black and Asian sort of relationships.
Well, it's also interesting to me that you're an Asian American woman who is participating in political activism in support of American causes while living abroad in France.
Yeah.
And that's how it originates for you. And I should also flag the fact that, at least from the outside looking in, I feel like France has a decorated or like a noticeable history of an ability to get out into the streets. Like, the French people can protest in ways that I admire. Like, if they don't like the train fares or what, you know what I'm saying? Or if they feel like there's a segment of the civil service that's being mistreated or isn't getting paid enough, like they'll just put a halt to the economy, or they'll stop, taking the trains or whatever it is. And
I think works. September 10th, right? It was the one day they banded together to force the French government just economy to lose. I don't know if they hit billions of euros, but yeah, they're very good at this, and it is a long running tradition. And I think Americans could stand to learn from that. But I think it speaks to the ways in which Americans feel so much more insecure than French people do. Because if you're living in a socialist society, you already feel a sort of safety net, right? You've had that your whole life. In America, where it's truly every man for himself, I think a lot of people who even have just a minimum wage job, the conditions of their life have made it impossible for them to just, start a dumpster fire on a Tuesday when they're supposed to be working. Like it just, I think our society has made it so very intentionally. So they fear that, right? They will take no chances to do that because they know their livelihood like hangs in the balance, right? So I will say maybe French people sometimes like take for granted that the ability to set all these dumpster fires. It is a type of privilege, but I've also seen the videos of like they sent in, their National Guard, and they're terrifying, and they're like tear gassing people, and they've been very cruel. So they're obviously still facing repercussions. And I think the current government, which has become more and more right-wing, is very much wants to stop this, very much wants to turn France more into America, less socialism, more fearful capitalism. Sorry, now we're just doing a podcast on France.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a fascinating part of your book, and it's a cool set of experiences, and it's formative.
Yeah, it was.
And I think that there's like a Mark Twain quote. What is it? Like, travel is the antidote to ignorance, or like if you go abroad, like it really is a great education. I mean, for 7 years in particular, to take yourself out of the States and put yourself into another culture and into another language, and to have to kind of learn about yourself in that context, but also to have to see home from afar. I think there's a clarity that can come, or maybe like some sort of new confusion, that can come from being away. Yes. And having to look back like across the ocean and maybe like into the past. And I guess with that in mind, I'd love to know a little bit more about you and maybe your formation as an artist. You've talked about this time in France, and you talked about undergrad at UC Irvine, and I think you went to grad school at NYU, you said. Yes. But like, you grew up in California though, right?
In Orange County. And for 5 years, I was in the Bay Area. So from like 8th grade to, 12th grade, I was in the Bay Area. And then I went back down to Orange County for college.
Orange County is interesting. Were you in Irvine?
I grew up in Anaheim Hills for a little bit, then moved to the edge of Fullerton and Placentia.
It's beautiful. I mean, it's got its beauties, Orange County does.
Yeah. I think something that because people just sort of assume like, oh, all California must be the same. There's like this whole debate about like, oh, West Coast Asians are so well adjusted versus East Coast Asians. But you can't forget that, if you grew up in Orange County at a certain time period, like the people around you were like the people on, that reality show, Laguna Beach.
Yeah.
So it's like you can't be well adjusted if you grew up in that context.
Listen, I woke up at 4:00 in the morning today, as I sometimes do. I just woke up and I felt wide awake. I pick up my phone and I'm kind of hoping that it's later. You know that feeling where you're like, I hope it's actually morning. But it was close enough. And I was
man.
So I pick up my phone. I'm like, I'm just going to lie in bed, but I'm not going to just lie in the dark. And I start scrolling. And you and I are talking in the aftermath of this Charlie Kirk shooting. Yeah. And I'm seeing all these videos that, as you're just flipping, I'm seeing these videos of all these crazy white supremacist bros in Huntington Beach. What is up with Huntington Beach? I mean, and for people listening who don't have, the map in their head, Huntington Beach is a beach town in Orange County. And it's kind of notorious for being like a hive of like white supremacist, like ultra conservative
And it's like the bro flavor. It's like a very specific, it's like you might not picture that they're wearing board shorts and like Quicksilver. Yeah.
They're surfers. They're like,
yeah.
And they're tatted up, but they're like really angry and they're really into being white and conservative. And like they're like all gathered and they're chanting White Lives Matter. And I mean, just like.
It's surreal. Yeah.
It's surreal.
Yeah. And in a way, I think sheds light on how white supremacy can, manifest in any number of ways, right? It doesn't matter if, let's say, you're highly college educated or what have you. Like there were, I think so many people in the 2016 election were shocked by the results because that's when we learned about the covert supporters, right, of Trump. So that's a very real thing is people can exist in the world in a certain way, but you have no idea what they actually think and what they won't say in public or in front of their colleagues, right?
I think that's very common. And I think there's also, I've experienced this in my own life with people being disillusioned with the Democrats to the point that they start drifting toward this kind of reactionary right. And I don't know. That's to me, that's its own little disaster. But I'm just like, how and why? And yet, I also understand that disillusionment to a great extent. I think Democrats have been not up to the task in so many different ways. Like I feel frustrated, so I get the frustration. I just don't get the response. But it's a crazy time, and I feel like growing up in Orange County, like you say, in the era of what was it called? It was the OC?
Laguna Beach was the reality show, but the OC was sort of its fictional counterpart.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So those, I totally get. That would have been, you would have had a window into maybe the future that was coming. So like what ages were you? You said you split your childhood between like Anaheim Hills and maybe Fullerton and what did you say? Placentia. Yeah. And then up in San Francisco?
Till 8th grade. Yeah. So up until 8th grade, that's when I moved to the Bay Area, the East Bay. And then, moved back down for college. So I felt like I spent most of those formative years in Orange County.
But like there's like a bifurcation for people who are not Californian between Northern Cal and Southern Cal. There's this kind
I was
of rivalry.
very angsty about it. When I moved up there, I did not want to move. It was because my family moved. And so, what are you going to do as a teenager? And so when I was there, I hated it for a long time. I refused to say hella or hecka. It was my small protest of like, I'm not from here. I'm from the superior part of California. I don't know why I held on to that. I think maybe I just didn't want to leave my friends and my life back, because moving when you're 14 is a terrifying time to move. It's like, it truly should be before middle school, maybe, or let's say like 4th grade or when you're 18, like any other time, it is horrifying to make new friends, right?
I did that.
You did that too? How old were you?
I was in 6th grade. I was going to say.
That's hard.
I think you got to be like 3rd grade or younger.
Yeah, that's ideal. When your memories are fuzzy and you make friends with anyone, right?
Yeah.
You like the same color crayon, your friends.
Yeah. You want to play? Like, that was it. But I feel like, man, I got into junior high. I showed up in a new school and didn't know anybody, and it was tough.
Yeah, I still remember. It's like a visceral feeling of like you walk in and you're like, I don't know where to sit.
Yes.
Where do I sit?
At lunch. Like who do I sit with? No one's going to talk to me. And it's like, the way that I think of it is that it's a kind of death.
Yeah.
Your entire life is gone. All your friends, the place you know, like it's gone. And you have to start over again. And
you have such a short life that atmosphere, that environment of your school and your friends, it's everything. It's not like you have the lived experience of an adult who's just like, I'm fine reading in a corner by myself, eating my sandwich. No, it's the worst thing in the entire world. And it feels like every eyeball, is looking at you with disdain. Yeah, you've gone through it too. So I wouldn't wish that upon anyone.
And yet I think it did strengthen me. How could it not, right? It strengthens you in a certain way socially, and it makes you maybe realize your ability to adapt.
Oh, yeah.
And, I'm sure I think it's a fair question. Like, would you have gone off to France for 7 years had you not moved? Maybe not. Who knows, Maybe you had a confidence about disorientation. Your book is called Disorientation. That's an experience that you're familiar with, and maybe you develop a certain comfort level with it that you might not have if you stay in one place your whole life,
That's true, yeah. Because I think some people, it's like they'll talk about, I'd love to experience what is it like living in New York or in a different country. But I think generally humans are, your actual brain is hardwired for comfort. It doesn't typically like risks. So I think something does happen at some point because of whatever, childhood experience that makes some people seek it out rather than fear it.
Yeah. So do you have any storytellers in your family? I'm always curious, like, where it comes from. Can you trace?
Oh, this is a long story that I've written an essay about. We'll see if it gets published, but I'm estranged from my mother, and I didn't know until I was 16. Like, I just didn't know anything about her. Like, I won't get into all the details. It's very long and complicated, but essentially when I was 16, my cousin visited from Taiwan because she has lived in Taiwan ever since my parents got divorced when I was very young. And he just told me, "Oh, did you know your mom's a writer?" And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, what?" And he's like, "She's published all these books and she's on TV. She gives relationship advice." And I was, my mind was blown because even though I was only 16, I, at that point, already thought of myself as a writer. It was the only thing I loved, the only subject I loved. And I was writing all the time. I wrote, very melodramatic poetry. I would write some stories. They were more I think fantasies of being a different person. But when I look at it now, I'm like, oh wait, this is fiction. I'd give myself a new name and I'd give myself a new set of circumstances. But I couldn't believe how it manifested in me without being raised by her.
That's
and
wild.
I was instead raised by my dad, who was the complete opposite. He's a scientist. He studied to be a physicist, and he always hoped I would be really good at math and science like he was. I absolutely was not. They didn't come naturally to me at all. It was fighting against my nature, trying to understand anything above long division, and somehow writing just came to me so naturally. So I guess it's sort of an interesting insight into nature versus nurture, right? In my case, it manifested in me.
So that your mom's a writer. Does your mom know that you're a writer?
I don't know. Yeah, we haven't spoken. I think it's now been 16 years. But I wonder, in the past I could Google her, and I don't know if she's ever Googled me, which is such a strange thing to say and to think about. But there it is. Yeah.
Have your books been translated into Taiwanese or Mandarin, I guess?
Yeah, Mandarin. No, I wish they would be. If anyone listening happens to know a Taiwanese publisher, I think it would feel like a homecoming to me. Taiwan, occupies a really special place in my heart, and it's a place where I could have lived my whole life. It's depending on what parent got custody of me. This moment in time right now, not that I don't know, I'm certain it wouldn't exist, right? I would have had an entirely different life in Taiwan. I have no idea what I'd be doing, but it wouldn't be this. And so that's another thing that fascinates me. It's just sort of the terror of decision, right? The permanency of one decision.
Yeah.
And you can't walk it back,
Yeah. Yeah. It's like fate. It's destiny. It's, but yet there's choice involved. And I don't know where you stand on free will. I've heard different things through the years. That feels too big of I try to contemplate that. There's no free will. And I'm just okay, the universe just becomes terrifying at that point, or even more terrifying. But It's fascinating to think of these very consequential decisions that, like you say, you cannot reverse once they are made, and they have such an enormous and ongoing impact on your reality. So it sounds like from your teenage years, you were writing and you were kind of on this track. And I'm imagining you were a big reader and you had you had heroes.
That's the activity my dad freely let me do. I mean, he didn't know what I was checking out at the library. I do remember reading Dean Koontz when I was like 11. That surely was not appropriate for an 11.
Local Orange County guy. I think I've interviewed Dean. I've interviewed him.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I was prepping and like he had this house. I think he has since moved or downsized, but he had this like 15,000 square foot house with different sections of it decorated to resemble different countries because I think he's scared of flying.
Incredible.
But he wanted to have the experience of travel, so he could just be like, I'm not going to get on a plane, but I can walk over to like the east wing of my mansion and go to Italy.
I love this lore. It's like, Willy Wonka, but for travel. That's really beautiful. And it's sort of sweet, that he's like, I just really want to travel, but has every right to be terrified of flying. Have you seen the second season of The Rehearsal on HBO? I love it. Please check it out. I mean, it may terrify you, but it's also, if you're interested in like the genre blurring of fiction, nonfiction, that show does
Who's
it
in
so
it?
beautifully.
I'm so bad at TV. Who's in it?
It's a Nathan Fielder show. He made Nathan for You, but The Rehearsal, it's just on another level. It's mind blowing. Like I don't use that often for like a TV show that's truly mind blowing and very humanistic. His work, even if it's sort of out there and funny, I think he is another person who's always just trying to also figure out like what a weird thing to be alive. Right?
Totally.
Humans are just so weird, and I love that he leans into that. Yes, but I loved reading. I read a lot of the classics like Judy Blume. Those Little Woman. I was obsessed with Little Woman to the point where I adapted part of it into a play when I was in 6th grade, and I forced 3 of my friends to act. So I'm like, oh, this is sort of fitting that now, I'm screenwriting and doing all of that. So I'm like, I didn't know I was adapting original IP, in like the 90s.
So wait, you are a screenwriter now?
Yes. I mean, things are slow, but I have been paid for my screenwriting before. So I think once that happened, I was like, well, I think I could say that now safely, right?
Like adapting your own work or writing original?
It was a short story, actually, that I adapted, and we sold the pilot and the story together. And it was a story that was in the collection and got cut about this. It was sort of a lighthearted, comical story about a 200-year-old Chinese ghost who's adopted by these very well-meaning parents, white parents from Indiana, and they enroll her in high school. And she's just trying to, be a normal human kid, but she's like terrifying looking and she can curse people. And so, chaos ensues, bloody prom, that type of stuff.
Well, I'm glad you made use of it. That's always nice.
Yeah. I mean, the show didn't get picked up, but again,
there.
It's another like room. This one, I feel quite a big room that's still inside me. That's still, it's always discombobulating that no one else can see it.
Right. And yet it's there. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, like, you're on this track, but was there a moment maybe when you were in college where you decided to really pursue this as a profession? Like, this is what I want to do with my life?
Well, I took creative writing for the first time in college, and it was like this fun elective, right? And UC Irvine has something called an emphasis, which is just shy of a minor. So I did the emphasis. I loved it. I mean, I felt, like alive, like it truly touched this part of me that was like, like falling in love, right? But at the same time, I had all this pressure on me to find a real job. So I immediately put it out of my mind. I mean, I didn't.
What was your major? Were you a physics major with an emphasis on creative writing?
English. I was English, yeah. And I did love my English classes back then. I think I had a chip on my shoulder. I wanted to be really good at it. I mean, I think I had hangups around feeling like I could be as good as other people in my classes, right, who were really good at English lit. And I did love it, genuinely. So at that point, because I had the pressure of, you need to have a real job, I decided to become an academic. So, my senior year, I was in the campus-wide honors program. We have to write a senior thesis. And it's so embarrassing, but my thesis was on Derrida. I'm like, it's such an undergrad, cringe, I'm writing about Derrida. I think I understand him. No, you don't. You're 21 and you don't understand. And I was reading, the modernists through him. So it was Joyce, Eliot, and Faulkner, 3 white guys. Well, 4 altogether, so that gives you a glimpse in, I think, how much I've changed. But yeah, I wrote that very difficult thesis in part because it was I'm applying to grad school. I have to really turn in something of substance, and I wanted to study modernism. But I still wanted to go abroad. So I remember taking the GRE in France. There's actually a center you can do that in. And it was still, I'm going to apply one day. I'm going to apply soon. Next year. I still want to stay in France. Okay, the year after. And eventually it was I'm not going back to the US anytime soon. Let me do a PhD in France. So that's what I did. I studied English Lit in Paris at the Sorbonne Nouvelle. And I had this whole life plan that I would switch from being an academic in America to being one in France. And I was in my second year when everything fell apart. There were sort of 2 back-to-back moments that happened that sort of changed everything for me. And the first one was the November 2015 terrorist attack. So that was the first time I felt confronted with my mortality.
Charlie Hebdo?
Yes.
You were there?
I was there. I lived yeah, a lot to discuss there, but I remember that night, going home on the subway, on the metro, you just didn't know if there were more bombs. You didn't know where else they'd been hidden. It was just a terrifying night where you didn't know if you were going to be okay, if your friends were going to be okay. And after that, I was very shaken because, and everyone in Paris, you could tell anytime I took the subway or the bus, everyone was looking at each other with fear and suspicion. And I started to think to myself, I could have died. I didn't really ever think I could die at that age, right? You live in that fantasy, yeah, death, whatever. But this time it was wait, death could have arrived for me. One of the students at my university was killed. I had gone to one of the restaurants that had been shot up a couple months before. It was just very close because Paris is a small city. So I was thinking about that. What am I doing with my life? Do I want to be mostly in a basement reading about dead people? Because I swear to God, that was truly most of my life. And then I did this graduate seminar. It was a seminar on gender. And I decided to give a talk about intersectionality, which we had never done before. And it was so poorly received. Professors, actual adult professors were screaming at me and pointing in my face, turning red in the face. And it was so horrible. I was crying afterwards, and I was physically shaking. I think I had faced aggression in France before, in the streets, but I just these were supposed to be my peers. My thesis advisor, I had 2. The French one was there. She didn't defend me. But talking about race, I guess at that point I hadn't realized how, volatile it was in France, because I was accused of undermining French democracy because they don't acknowledge race. That's a whole other thing. They don't officially, in the French Constitution, it's not acknowledged. You cannot sue someone for racial discrimination. It's illegal. Like if your boss straight up fired you because like, oh, I hate your race, you can't sue, because race is not acknowledged. So anyways, I guess because of that, I was undermining French democracy. And after that, I just lost faith. I was like, what am I doing here? What am I doing with my life? Do I want to be writing a dissertation and then spend the rest of my life teaching about more of these dead white people? I was like, I have one life, and the thing that I've always wanted to do that I was too afraid to do, or that I didn't see a future, like I didn't know how to do it because no one had shown me, was write fiction. So I made up my mind. I was like, I'm terrified. I don't know what I'm doing, but I will apply to MFA programs because I understand the sort of safe little confines of school. I've been in it for so long now that let me do that. If I get in, I'll use this as my one chance, and I did. And that's how I left France finally. And I felt ready to leave at that point. Even though Trump was now in power. So everyone is like, why are you going back now? Yeah. And I was like, because I'm that unhappy here, even with all the free healthcare. So that's what brought me back to fiction.
And you went to NYU.
Yes.
And during that time, you wrote some of these stories, or most all of these stories?
Not all. I would say, so You Put a Rabbit on Me, the novella, featured background, those were all written after I had already graduated.
Well, and now here you are. You've got your novel published. You've got your debut story collection published, both to great acclaim. Where Are You Really From is the official September pick of the Otherppl Book Club. I don't know how many signs you need that things are working out for you.
Thank you. That was so wonderful, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's an excellent collection, and it's been a great conversation. I have so enjoyed it and loved meeting you. And I just congratulate you on the start that you've gotten to your publishing career. I always close by asking my guest if they're working on anything new. It's fine if you're not, but usually writers have like a lot of irons in the fire. Is there another book in the works?
I would say not another book. I have some story ideas, but I'm working now on a film project. Well, a small short film project. That's my first. I can safely say like semi-autobiographical piece of work that I've ever done. And it's coming of age. It's weird. And hopefully, funny and dark at the same time.
Oh, and where is it? Is it is it almost done, or is it just?
No. It's there are so many things to do, but yeah, it's very nascent.
Okay. Well, we'll leave it there. Elaine, it's great to meet you. Thanks for the time, and I wish you well.
Thank you so much, Brad. Thank you for having me.
Okay, there we go. That was my conversation with Elaine Hsieh Chou. Wasn't that great? It was fun to meet her. Her debut story collection is called Where Are You Really From? It's available from Penguin Press. It is the official September pick of my book club, the Otherppl Book Club. You can sign up for that at otherppl.com. And you can learn more about Elaine and all of her work at ElaineHsiehChou.com. Follow her on Instagram and Blue Sky. I think she has a Substack, so check that out. Last time, the story collection is called Where Are You Really From? Go get your copy right away. It is excellent. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube, and you can follow me on Blue Sky and Instagram. Sign up for my newsletter at bradlisti.substack.com. If you love this show and you want to support it, you can do that at patreon.com/otherpplpod. If you want to join the book club or get a t-shirt, otherppl.com, the show's official website, is the place to do that. You can check out Deep Dive and the debut audio course, How to Write a Novel, at www.deepdive.audio. And last but not least, if you have a minute and you want to do me a quick favor, please rate and review this podcast wherever you listen. Give it a rating, write a little review. It helps it in the algorithm. It helps the show find new listeners. All right, so coming up on Thursday, I should be back with my friend and co-host Mira Gonzalez for a brand new episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, this podcast's weekly pop culture assessment. It's an informal show. It's loose. It's a hangout show. It's irreverent. It's meant to be light and easy if you need something light and easy in your life. So check it out, Brad and Mira for the Culture, coming up on Thursday. Stay tuned.